In Modernity, an Unfinished Project, Habermas is reacting against the problems of modernity in the 20th century, as well as criticisms of modernity that reject modernity as a plausible thing entirely, in order to argue for how modernity as a thing is not unredeemable, but rather a good project that is unfinished that has already been somewhat fruitful, but has more potential. To understand this, we should get into Habermas's definition of modernity. Simply put, for Habermas, modernity is a product of the European Enlightenment, based on reason in that very manner. Another way to say this is that modernity is the child of European Enlightenment. It is anchored in reason and democracy. Therefore, Habermas sees modernity as an unfinished project. It means that there has been much more to be done in the realm of modernity before thinking about the possibility of a postmodern world. Habermas thinks that this modernity is a normative project. So, in an attempt to answer to the atrocities of modernity, such as Holocaust, he explains how it was caused by a particular form of instrumental rationality. But there were other possibilities that were constructive within modernity as well. This is what makes Habermas claim modernity as an unfinished project, that there is much more to be done in the realm of modernity. Habermas sees in the institutional orders of modernity structures of rationality, whereas many intellectuals have become cynical about the emancipatory potential of modernity. Habermas continues to insist on the utopian potential of modernity. In a social context in which faith in the Enlightenment project of a good society promoted by reason sees a fading hope, Habermas instead remains one of its strongest defenders. So on postmodernism, remember our Foucault reading as an example. Habermas rejects postmodernism and believes it decisively presents itself as a form of anti-modernity. He believes postmodernism is another form of conservatism and acknowledges how sweeping it has been in every intellectual domain, criticizing it for being overly cynical. Nevertheless, Habermas still realizes that problems of modernity can't simply be solved by the status quo learning to function better in its instrumental rationality, especially considering the split of science, art, and morality into separate, expertized cultural value spheres. So, which is to say, separate sections, which science, art, and morality fall into. This can be seen in the expert specified language each sphere has. As long as it is super separated in that manner, things won't be good, because communication would therefore not be possible. And for Habermas, language is a significant part of human development. An undistorted communication could lay the foundation of emancipatory practice, and distorted communication could result in false consciousness. It is the undistorted communication that rationality has a prime role. This is part of Habermas's theory of communication and his communicative rationality. This also brings up an important concept called the life world. For Habermas, the life world is the shared understandings and values that develop through contact over time in social groups. Habermas believes by reconnecting to this life world systems, examples being state, expert culture, that it is possible to create a better enriching scenario of modernity. Habermas believes that we don't need to completely get rid of our status quo systems, German capitalism as an example, to enrich society, and that it is possible within modernity, as modernity can preserve something of the original intention of experimental reflections on the reception of non-autocratic works of art through this reconnection to the life world. This life world is in part with Habermas's theory of rationalization. Both of these, remember, rest on his framework of democracy and the public sphere. He says that many of the ideas of Marx have become obsolete. He therefore looks to Weber as a source of alternative ideas. He also suggests that some of the basic principles which inspired Marx's writing need to be sustained. For example, capitalism has proved capable of generating enormous wealth, Nonetheless, some of the fundamental problems identified in the capitalistic economy are still there, such as the tendency to produce economic depressions or a crisis. Therefore, if this is the case, one could argue that the need to reestablish our control over economic processes which have come to control us more than we have controlled them. One of the ways of achieving such control, Habermas proposes, is by a revival of what he calls the public sphere. The public sphere is essentially the framework of democracy. His democracy is not the present democracy of government and procedures of representation. He talks about the rationalization of system and life world. There is rationality in the system. Parliament, executive, judiciary, and other institutions of public sphere. Thus, there is also rationality in our day-to-day working. The rationality both in the system and life world is different. In the system, there is domination of formal rationality, whereas in the life world, there is practical rationality. In such a situation, Habermas argued, a rational society would be one in which both system and life world are permitted to rationalize in their own way, following their own logics. The rationalization of system and life world would lead to a society with material abundance and control over its environments as a result of rational systems and truth, goodness, and beauty stemming from a rational-like world. But what has happened today is that the system rationality has colonized or subordinated the life world rationality. State, that is, system rationality has gained hegemony over our day-to-day life. In practice, life world has become subordinate to state or system rationality. This is not modernity. For modernity, the final project would be as Habermas observes. A fully rational society is that in which both system and life world rationality were allowed to express themselves fully without one destroying the other. We must currently suffer from an impoverished life world, and that problem must be overcome. However, the answer doesn't lie in the destruction of systems, especially economic and administrative systems, since it is they that provide the material prerequisites needed to allow life world rationalization. Habermas has dealt with the problems created by system rationality. State is the biggest creator of problems sometimes. It is bureaucratic, legal, and rational. It interferes in the life world in such a big way that the individual remains a fractured entity. Habermas does not think the problem can be solved in this way. Rather, effort should be made to solve the relationship between system and life world. So in his conclusion, he writes, contemporary problems cannot be solved by the system learning to function better. Rather, impulses from the life world must be able to enter into the self-steering of functional systems. This would constitute important steps toward the creation of mutually enriching life world and system. It is here that social movements enter the picture because they represent the hope of recouping of system and life world so that the two can rationalize itself to the highest possible degree. Here are my discussion questions.